AP has a very disturbing story. Trump hints at expanded role for the military within the U.S. I think he's more than hinting it. He is talking about how urban areas are crime dens. And he says that he was stopped from invoking the Insurrection Act and sending in actual, active army units into the cities. He said, the next time I'm not waiting. One of the things I did was let them run it. And we're going to show how bad a job they do. Well, we did that. We don't have to wait any longer. The AP says Trump has not spelled out precisely how he might use the military during a second term, although he and his advisors have suggested that they have wide latitude to call up units, while deploying the military regularly within the country's borders would be a departure from tradition. The former president has already signaled an aggressive agenda if he wins, from mass deportations to travel bans, etc. And then it talks about the Insurrection Act. This is what I wanted to ask you about. This is a law first crafted in the nation's infancy, gives Trump as commander-in-chief almost unfettered power to send in the military. The Insurrection Act allows presidents to call on reserve or active duty military units to respond to unrest in the states, an authority, David, that is not reviewable by the courts. One of its few guardrails merely requires the president to request the participants disperse. The principal constraint on the president's use of the Insurrection Act is basically political. The presidents don't want to be the guy who sent tanks rolling down Main Street, said a national security expert with the Brennan Center. There's not much really in the law to stay the president's hands. Okay. So is that your read of this, that the president, that Trump 2.0 will have figured out, I have this weapon. I can deploy the military domestically. And the only restraint is really political. And the fact is that politically, Donald Trump probably doesn't think this is a negative to send the tanks into the streets.
Yeah. So unfortunately, that analysis is pretty much correct.
It is.
Yeah, it's pretty much correct. Now, there's basically three instances in which the president can call out the troops. Number one is probably not going to be a factor, and that's on the request of, say, the state legislature or the governor of a state. Now, I could imagine a red state governor doing that, but many of these big blue cities are also in big blue states, and you would not have the governor and the legislature asking for it. But there are other parts that don't require on the governor or legislature to say anything at all. So, for example, it says, whenever the president considers, now that's your key language, whenever the president considers that unlawful obstructions, combinations, or assemblages or rebellions against the authority of the United States make it impracticable to enforce the laws of the United States in any state by the ordinary course of judicial proceedings, he may call into federal service such of the militia of any state and use such of the armed services as he considers necessary.
But this is not reviewable by the courts? I mean, this is a unilateral power that he has?
I mean, anything, the court may choose to say this is non-justiciable. In other words, what the statute itself says, whenever the president considers. So this is very poor drafting. And so we're looking here at a terrible, sad irony, Charlie, because this is a post-Civil War act that's obviously designed to deal with any future insurrections or rebellions akin to the Civil War. The closest we have come to that is January 6th, right? Yeah. The closest we've come to an actual, say, coup against the United States government since the Civil War is January 6th. And there's actually provisions to deal with that, which is the Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, which should tell us that Trump is ineligible to be president. Here's the sad irony. He may escape entirely the actual consequences of post-Civil War measures designed to keep people like him out of office, and then seize the reins and seize control over broad post-Civil War statutes that give him the authority to deploy the military. And this is where we are. And Charlie, if there's, I don't want to pollute your feed by promoting my own podcast, but on my legal podcast, Advisory Opinions with Sarah Isger, we have talked about the persistent problem of terrible congressional drafting for years. This is a more than decades long problem. If you go back to example, the Electoral Count Act, before it was amended, it was an unbelievable mess.
Total cluster.
And a lot of, if you talk about going back to the Muslim ban litigation, Trump relied on an extremely broad, poorly drafted statute. The Supreme Court couldn't redraft the statute. It was terribly drafted by Congress. This is as well. And what both the statute enabling the president in the Muslim ban cases and this statute, what they share in common is Congress essentially placing in the office of the presidency an enormous amount of trust. These statutes were written as if the president was presumptively trustworthy.
Yes.
And that's bad drafting. That's bad statute making. That's bad law making to draft statutes placing trust in the character of a president. Do not do that. Now, the sad thing is, Charlie, we don't have a Congress right now that can revise that statute because a lot of members of the MAGA Congress would be happy for him to invoke the Insurrection Act. They want him to do that, to wield the full power of the state against protesters. And now, to be clear, opposing the Insurrection Act is not supporting violent riots, but you can deal with rioting short of the 101st Airborne.
So to your point here, and I think this is something that a lot of people have not come to grips with because we've gotten, tangled up in is Donald Trump a fascist? Is he not a fascist? Should we use the word fascist? The reality is that there's a large number of Americans that like the idea of the strong man, of the man of action, of the man who will in fact impose discipline and order. And that Donald Trump has kind of tapped into that he kind of understands that whatever you call it, that there is an appetite for the man of action who is going to sweep aside the ineffectual norms of a liberal democracy, who will in fact deal with the vermin, within society, who will deal with the people who are poisoning the blood, that this in fact is not disqualifying. I think there's a lot of people in our world who think that if you point this out, people will go, oh my God, this is terrible. This man is a fascist. When a lot of Americans are going, I actually like the idea of the wall. I want to restrict immigration. I do think that the greatest enemy, threat to America is fellow Americans.